Hello there, I'm Elwin. Let's talk more about the famous witch and skin turner known as Aunt Alsey.
Beyond the weather and the marsh, there is a whisper in the dark through the tides of disarray, where wisdom knows the way. If you listen very still, there are answers to the endless, where the ancient pulses deep of the memories you keep.
Once was an old woman from Antony in Cornwall who was known as Aunt Alsey. She had a very violent disposition, and all the townsfolk said she was a witch. These comments were in theory, however, that thus far had been no evidence of witchcraft. The comments were based on her mean nature, her nasty temperament alone, you see. Her landlord, however, a man named John Richards. He lived in a town nearby that was formerly known as Dock. It's now known as Devonport, which is in Plymouth. He had to cross the River Tamar and to walk up to the village and collect the rent that was owed on his cottages. Aunt Alsey had no means of work or income. She got by on local generosity, and she never paid her rent. She had lived in the cottage year on year, and thus began to believe it to be her own. One wet and dreary day, a storm blew in which rivalled the scene brewing below between the landlord, John Richards, and Aunt Alsey, or Alsey. Richards had come to collect on his rent that was due. In a vicious temper, Alsey cursed Richard's wife and unborn child, and everything he owned as the thunder echoed above. A truly dramatic scene, I'm sure. Hastily retreating back down the lane, Richards thought he'd call back on a brighter day, preferably with some reinforcements to help evict her. Richard deserved his money due, and the cottage was falling into a state of disrepair. She wouldn't let anyone near it. Richard's home was at the back of a grocery shop, where his wife served customers, and he did such tasks as orderings and accounts and things, and Mrs. Richards was in the middle of weighing a customer's items on the scales when a large toad fell from the ceiling and knocked the scales aside. It was the very same toad that had taken to appearing around in the corners of the shop floors that had been seen before. Richard's wife fainted, and he tried to revive her, and in frustration and perhaps a fear of what was said to him the days before, he picked up the toad and threw it into the fiery hearth. He returned to care for his wife, but to whip himself around, and as he heard his young daughter scream as the toad crawled from the fireplace, smouldering still. This time he took the toad and threw it out of the window, straight into his garden. When the next day he went in remorse to bury the toad, it was nowhere to be seen. However, later he received word from Antony that told him how Aunt Alsey had died in a fire at her cottage. Alsey had stumbled and fell into her hearth and was found with burns all over her body. Upon examination, the burns appeared similar to where the toad had been aflame itself. Naturally enough, Richards became fearful for his unborn child, as Aunt Alsey had cursed him also. The boy was born healthy, and he grew up strong enough to join the Navy. He made his parents extremely proud, even though eventually he did die at sea. There are many variations of this story, but what remains the same is Aunt Ailsie's capacity to skin turn and use it to keep an eye upon her supposed enemies, you see. There is a long line of history, especially within forms of Cornish folk practice and skin turning. To go into a toad, to go into the form of a hare, a deer, a crow, an owl, a badger, a spider. It holds a certain fear amongst the local populace of the time that the witch could see all and go unseen. Thank you for listening and learning more about Aunt Ailsey, and please don't forget to check out my other platforms like TikTok, Instagram or Facebook. Join my Patreon and get access to more of my unseen content and a Discord. Or perhaps you would like to buy a reading from me off of my website, theantleredcrown.com. Until next time, have a blessed day. Goodbye.